Well, good evening. This is Glimpses Coffee House, and we are pleased to welcome Michael Warnken again to speak about representation with our government. Thank you very much. Michael.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody having me here. Today I'm going to talk about an issue that's not often discussed, at least not in modern times. Rarely is it ever brought up, and it is perhaps, I would argue, the most central theme to a properly formed government. I myself sort of ran into this sort of haphazard on accident. About 10 years ago, I had to deal with some big problems in the government, and I was stuck, if not flabbergasted, with how badly not only does our government operate, but how badly it treats us. And for about 3 years, I sort of spent time just going at it, examining it, trying to figure out why is the very branches of government that we're paying money to damaging us. And I don't use that in any small terminology. I mean, we all we've come together because we're wondering what in the heck is going on and why is it wrong. So, in all my experience and all my understanding, I sat down and I read the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. I was reading about corruption across America and across the nation, and I came into this one little issue of what proper representation is. And the ironic thing was, it kind of came down to watching a small state of New Hampshire deal with the judiciary there. They have a 5-man Supreme Court, and 3 of them were being impeached by their House of Representatives. And I got to say, what they were being impeached for was pretty minor next to what I watched go on in courtrooms all over the place. And they spent 4 months going after 3 of these 5 judges, and in the end, 2 of them had to step down because the House spent so much time uncovering all this corruption that they had no choice but to step down. So anyway, many of you here, I know, are well attuned to the Constitution. You've probably read it, the Bill of Rights, you've probably read the Declaration of Independence. You know, we all cherish these documents. There are a lot of different people who take different approaches to looking at the Constitution. There's libertarians, there are the so-called liberal lions who like to take a more liberal view on things. There are the, I guess what we'd call the constructionists, sort of like Scalia, that take a more conservative view. My view, and I don't even know that it's even been dealt with or even discussed, I'm introducing what I call structuralism. My belief is you can have all the words that you want lined up, you can have all the agreements, all the ideas, all the most wonderful concepts together. If you don't have teeth, if you don't have the proper form of a government, then it doesn't matter what you believe your rights are, because they do not exist. When you have adequate representation, when you have a small executive, when you have very few members of the judiciary, that's when you can start experiencing liberty. Today, we're completely on our head. We have extremely few reps. We have lots and lots of members of the executive branch and a judiciary that can barely handle the business that they have, and mainly because the legislature doesn't do it. So anyway, I'm introducing to you all the concept of structuralism, and I'm going to go into what that means. Basically, when our nation was founded, one of the most intense discussions was, what should representation be? And originally, as they were drafting the Constitution between basically June of 1787 till September of 1787, that's when they put all the clauses in. But the main thing that they discussed, one of the biggest fights, was how many representatives should they have? And all throughout the construction of the time, basically, it was 40,000. 1 U.S. House member for every 40,000. And that was kind of strange, because when you got into the representation of the states, they were very small districts. Each rep had 4,000 at most, and that was Virginia. The smallest state had 1 rep for every 600 people. So at the end of the convention, George Washington stood up, and he said it was the only thing that he said during the entire summer, and he said 30,000 is representation and 40,000 is tyranny. And that is what they put in the Constitution. Since then, and after it was ratified, they increased representation a few times, and all the way until 1913. And then they froze the U.S. House at 435 members, which is what we still have today. The population has tripled since then. There were about 100 million people. Today, there are about 300 million people. They have the same 435. Back then, each U.S. House member used to have about 215,000 people. Today, each one has 700,000 people per representative. And that's where we are today. If George Washington said 40,000 was tyranny and 30,000 was representation, what's 700,000? We're tyranny squared, if not worse. And anyway, if you read the Federalist Papers, allowing to this case the weight which it is due and comprising it to the House of Representatives as above explained, it seems that the fullest assurance that a representative for every 30,000 inhabitants will render the latter both a safe and competent guardian of the interests that it will be confided in. When George Washington stood up, he said, the smallness of proportion of representatives has been considered by many members of the convention an insufficient security for the rights and interests of the people. So we have George Washington coming out and saying that 40,000 isn't enough to represent you. It's not enough to protect your interests. It's not enough to protect your civil liberties. So 30,000 was what was considered adequate. Ironically, the anti-federalists thought 30,000 to 1 was crazy. They thought that was way too large. A small representation can never be well informed of the circumstances of the people, the members of which must be too far removed from the people in general to sympathize with them, and too few to communicate with them. Where there's at least 1 for 30 or 40,000, it appears to me that they can neither mix nor be acquainted with the few respectable characters among his constituents. So the big fight was to get our Constitution ratified. And the Anti-Federalists said, no, we're not going to go for this. And that's when they fought over the Bill of Rights. And it was them fighting against this, at least, that pushed representation down and got us the Bill of Rights, because we wouldn't have had that. And if you look at the Constitution, it's a governing document. It's the Bill of Rights that actually gives us our liberties. The states also were supposed to have good representation. In fact, they were supposed to have better representation than the federal government. One of the justifications that the federal government would have for having 1 rep for every 30,000 people was the fact that they were only supposed to conduct interstate commerce, interstate taxation, and war. So you needed fewer reps. The states were supposed to be where most of the power was at. And in the Federalist Papers, it even makes the point that the representation was supposed to be 10 to 1. So if each U.S. House member represented 30,000, each rep in the lower chamber of your state would have 3,000. And interestingly enough, is we're in California here, in 1850, we had about 36 assembly members and 16 senators for a population of 92,000 people. And that was about 1 rep for every 3,000 people. And in 1852, they increased the number of reps to 63 because the population shot up to 150,000. So we went from 90,000 to 150,000. And so they said we need to increase the number of reps. And in 1854, they went from 63 to 80. And it never increased ever again. The population in 1854 was about 207,000. So each rep had 2,500 people. Today we have 80 assembly members, and we're almost at 40 million. So the districts in California for each assembly member went from about 2,500 to 500,000. So if a U.S. House member wasn't supposed to represent 40,000, how in the heck can a state rep have 500,000 people? And yet that's where we're at. Your liberties are tied to your access to your representative. When representation increases, you have access to your rep. Your rep can take care of you. When the district gets bigger, they can ignore you. And surprise, they do. This is the most important thing. If this issue doesn't get dealt with, every other reform that you want to take a stab at is meaningless, is irrelevant, doesn't have a chance. Your ability to meet with your representative is the prime fortification for all the liberties you have written in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. So, let me see here. The Federalist Papers get into the fact that representation was supposed to advance with the population. At present, some states are little more than a society of husbandmen. Few of them have made much progression in those branches of industry which give variety and complexity to the affairs of a nation. These, however, will in all of them be the fruits of a more advanced population and will require on the part of each state a fuller representation. That's Federalist 56. So, not ambiguous. When the population grows, representation needs to grow. And again, the proclivity is the reps don't like to increase the number of reps because that's competition. That takes away from their power. Thomas Paine was more clear. He said, "Some convenient tree will afford them a state house under the branches of which the whole colony may assemble and deliberate on public matters. It is more probable that their first laws will be only regulations and be forced by no other penalty than public disesteem. It is their first parliament. In their first parliament, every man by natural right will have a seat." He says, "However, but as the colony increases, the public concerns will increase likewise, and the distance at which the members may be separated will render it too inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion at first. When their member was small, their habitations near, the public concerns few and trifling. This will point out the convenience of their consenting to leave the legislative part to be managed by a select number of members chosen by the whole body, who are supposed to have the same concerns at stake as those who appointed them, and who will act in the same manner as the whole body will act as if they were present. If the colony continue increasing, it will become necessary to augment the number of representatives, and that the interest of every part of the colony be attended to." So we have California, which has 40 million people, and we have 40 senators and 80 assembly members. Reading has 1 rep, maybe 2. San Diego has 5 reps, but no near adequate to represent all the population. Certainly not to meet with you, and certainly not to discuss problems, and certainly not to take care of you. Okay, I guess the current trend is to decrease representation. In, I think it was 1980, the current governor, Quinn, I think he was the Secretary of State at the time, and he actually passed an initiative to shrink the number of members in Illinois. About 15 years ago, Connecticut did something similar. And Vermont also made a decrease. They actually went from 260 reps in their lower chamber to 160. They still have excellent representation at 1 for every 4,000 people, which is about what our founders wanted, but they had much better. George Mason, he said he was convinced that once the House began meeting, it would resist efforts to add more members, which he believed was necessary for the body to represent a diverse interest of the people. And he gave Virginia's example. He said they had 10 members of the U.S. House. He said he wondered why those individuals would agree to increase the size of the House and decrease their power, because he said each would never lessen his own power and influence, for the greater the number of men among whom any given quantum of power is divided, the less power of each individual. And that's where we are today. Pennsylvania has 202 members in their lower house, and they're actually moving to try and decrease it to 160. And they will. And by doing that, they're going to damage the citizens. And they'll make it more open for their citizenry to be hurt by the other branches of government. It is a very dangerous trend, and that's what's going on. John Adams made the point that in any government, the most important aspect to take care of was the legislature. He said the principal difficulty lies and the greatest care should be employed in constituting the representative assembly. It should be a miniature, an exact portrait of the people at large. It should think, feel, reason, and act like them, that it may be in the interest of the assembly to do strict justice at all times. It should be equal representation, or in other words, equal interest among the people, and should have an equal interest in them. John Adams. The legislature is the most important branch of government. The executive is the most dangerous. The legislature is supposed to represent our interests. The laws they pass are supposed to reflect our interests. They're supposed to take what most of us think and somehow make a compromise so it takes care of all the interests of the public and makes a law that's crafted to take care of us. And then, as crazy as it may sound, they're supposed to come back to us and inform us what they did. If you've ever had a problem with the law and you went to see your rep, what do they tell you? Hire a lawyer. Hire a lawyer is what they'll tell you. The laws were supposed to be few, very few. They were supposed to be easy to understand. And today in California, I think on any given year, we can have as many as 4,000 statutes. I usually have a prop with me. I usually bring the penal code just to show. Because as they say, ignorance is not an excuse. So you're supposed to know everything that's in there, but you can't possibly. And every year, the laws become more egregious as our reps become further involved with us or less involved with us. The laws become more damaging, and that's where we're going. And that's why when our founder said, when you don't have adequate representation, you have tyranny. And that's, in essence, what we have. Let me see here. District size and lack of responsiveness. Just for an anecdote, about 3 years ago, I filed a lawsuit against the California Assembly. And it was kind of interesting. I followed a couple cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, and I basically sent 16 petitions into the legislature. I didn't get a single response. And so when the case got to court, the gentleman who was representing the Assembly, he basically represented the unions. And he had one case he actually represented the prison guards, which sort of made me a little bit nervous, but nonetheless. And he kept on saying his defense was that I'm equally as damaged as everybody else because the districts are so big. And I said, well, that's not really the case because I sent in 16 petitions. And I said, while the legislature was in session, they ignored all my petitions, but they were helping other people. And I said for them to survive equal protection, they would have to prove the Assembly did nothing for nobody. And even they couldn't deal with that. I ended up losing. They spent a lot of money fighting me on it, but it was a very important issue for them to make sure they stopped. When you have a small legislature, those people who get money from the legislature like small legislatures. They like the ability, like in California, you need 41 votes in the House, 21 in the Senate, and you need a president, the governor, to sign off on a bill. So 63 people in this state can do anything. One of the first things that they tried to do was increase the U.S. House, and they tried to do it quickly because they realized that at the time there were 26 U.S. senators and 65 House members, and they said, what's a quorum? Well, 26, that's 14. And if 65, a quorum would be 33. So 14 and 33, what's the majority of that? That could do anything in the nation they wanted. So one of the first things that James Madison tried to do is he tried to increase the U.S. House right away, and it was all voted down. At least it's gone up a little bit since then. But again, unless representation increases as the population grows, and again, this is an issue that almost nobody looks at or even sees, or for the most part, until I bring it up to them, they'd never even seen, considered, or realized that this is sort of a root cause of why everything's messed up. So anyway, so I guess the basic gist of it is, as the districts get bigger, your reps ignore you, unless you send them a $10,000 check, and then they might pay attention. So there you go. Anybody want to ask a question? I can field some. I don't want to feel like I'm lecturing to you guys, and I already am. So go for it.
So if California has 40 million citizens, and we go with a ratio of 40,000 citizens to one rep, that would create a House of Representatives or a state legislature of 1,000 people.
Yes.
Now, already we have 80 people that we can't get to agree. Wouldn't that complexity expand if we had 1,000 people that we had to get 501 to agree?
Interestingly enough, not only were representatives supposed to increase with the population, but if a state, especially a large state like California, had enough reps, they could invoke Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution and split the state, which is something that I advocate that needs to happen. And yes, so an increase in representation. It's hard to say. There are representative assemblies in history. One, the largest I saw was 10,000, and it didn't meet very long. There are still legislative assemblies, a Leggermain in Switzerland that has 7,000 individuals. They actually can meet. It is something that's posed once in a while, that if a body is too big, is it unwieldy? I can't find a size in which it truly becomes unwieldy. The real work of a legislature is done in its committees. And I'll get into that at some point in time. So when you increase the number of reps, they're actually able to do committee work. Whereas in California right now, you'll go to a committee meeting, and sometimes the only people who are there are the chairs, and maybe one person from the opposition. So I mean, it's sort of like missing teeth, so to speak. So anyway, another topic that is of tremendous importance is the hill rat problem. And I call it the hill rat. There was a staffer in Washington, D.C., and I think it was around 1990, he wrote a book called Hill Rat. Instead of adding representatives, our reps have taken on to this wonderful trend of adding assistants. And if you read the Constitutional Convention notes of 1787, they don't mention ever assistance. One of the things I like doing is I like looking at them, sometimes poking fun at them, so where in the Constitution are you? And they aren't. But it is a trend that they like doing. Instead of adding more reps, they clearly cannot do their business, so they've taken on this trend of adding assistants. And this gentleman who wrote the book I have, Hill Rat, he noted in, I guess it's around 1900 is when these guys started showing up. And he noted in 1934 that there were as many as 992 assistants in Washington, D.C. In 1984, that number exploded to 9,700. And the latest figure that I have puts the number of assistants in Washington, D.C. between 12 and 19,000 assistants. Right now we have, I guess right now at this very moment, there's a debate going on between two people running for our local congressional district. And a lot of people in the debate will be asking our Congress people and the person challenging them, where do you stand on this issue? And I'm here to tell you the better question is, who are you going to hire and what's their stand going to be? Because we have so many of these assistants at this point in time, they're making the decisions for their rep. It's gotten so bad that the lobbyists are now lobbying the Hill Rats, the assistants. Clorox, huge corporations like American Airlines. Maybe I shouldn't single anybody out because they're all doing it. I mean, it's, you know, to a certain extent, we get angry with lobbyists, and I understand their duty. At the same time, we do get to the point where we don't like the fact that they're advancing interests that may not jive with what we like. It's a new ball game when they're going to the assistants. And the idea that we have to increase the number of assistants to help them communicate with everybody in their district, that's a fine idea, but it never really works that way. When you call the phone line, you get the secretary, and what they end up doing is reapportioning their other Hill Rats to the more wealthy donors. That's what really happens. So we have salaries off the charts for these staff members. They're such a wide portion. I had one figure saying as many as 1 in 3 of these people in D.C. making as much as $100,000 a year. In California, the chief of staff for the speaker makes $16,000 a month. That's staggering. Our reps were supposed to come from the same stature and same situation as the rest of us. When you're paying the assistants almost $20,000 a month, you will be ignored. They will not care what happens to you after the bills they pass. So anyway, I guess the greater gist of it is, rather than adding more reps, they've added more assistants. So when you don't have access to your rep, if you're lucky, you get the assistant, and the reality is the assistant doesn't help you. And if you really want to, you ask them, well, do I need to give you a donation? And that becomes even more awkward. So, but that's definitely not the way a representative government should work. So, I touched on this a little bit earlier. The Federalist Papers got into this. It's the relationship between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. There's a great quote in the Federalist Papers. The members of the executive and judiciary departments are few in number and can be personally known only to a few and small part of the people. The members of the legislative department, on the other hand, are numerous. They are distributed and dwell among the people at large. Their connections of blood, of friendship, and of acquaintance embrace a great proportion of the most influential part of the society. The nature of their public trust implies personal influence among the people, and that they are the more immediate and confidential guardians of the rights and liberties of the people. The executive is the most dangerous branch of government. The legislature is the most important. When this was written, it truly was that way. In 1789, when the first judiciary was introduced, there were 19 federal judges. There were 26 U.S. senators and 65 House members. We actually had impeachments. There were more reps in the legislature than there were judges. And they were actually able to watch them. Today, at the federal level, there are over 1,000 federal judges, and that's not including magistrates, that's not including administrative judges. We have 100 U.S. senators and 435 House members. How in the heck can 100 senators and 435 House members watch over 1,000 judges? They can't. Who has more power? I'm here to tell you, the judiciary does. And it shouldn't be that way. And you shouldn't have to hire a lawyer if you've got a problem. You should be able to go to the legislature and get your problem dealt with. In California, the same thing was true. In 1850, we had 12 judges, 16 senators, and 36 assembly members. And we also had impeachments. Today in California, we have 1,700 judges, 40 senators, and 80 assembly members. The last impeachment was in 1929. It's a long time ago. I think there's probably a lot more impeachments that need to be done that probably aren't being done because we don't have enough reps. Let me see here. Duties of a representative body. I think this is probably the most important issue altogether. What are the duties of a representative body? And I like to say two. Most people, if you ask them, and I can't blame them either, if you ask, what are the two duties of a legislature? They would probably tell you to write laws, and number two, to pass spending bills, to pass a budget. And that's about all they do right now. The real two original duties of a legislative body, as ancient as you can make it. First one is to take petitions for redress of grievances. We have a legislature under the theory from our founders, from the wars they had with the British, was the aspect of taxation without representation. It wasn't just so we'd have representatives so we could pay taxes. In natural law, without even citing a code, without even citing a statute, you do not pay the person who's whipping you. You do not feed the machine that's damaging you. The whole reason you have a rep was not only to equalize taxation and make it fair, but also to deal with your grievances. And at some point in time, you should be able to say, no, I'm funding machinery that doesn't fix itself, does not pull back, is damaging us, and yet that's one of the very things we have today. Our executive branch is expanding, the legislature gets smaller as the population grows, and we have fewer and fewer people to go to. And you're told by most people that if you've got a problem, hire a lawyer. And you better have the $250 to $450 an hour to pay him, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you're out of luck. Let me see here. Blackstone from England said that Parliament was to be permitted to sit annually only for redress of grievances. And he said, and dispatch of business if need be. Madison, when he was introducing the Bill of Rights, he said the people should not be restrained from peacefully assembling and consulting for their common good, nor from applying to legislature by petitions or remonstrances for the redress of their grievances. The presumption of the First Amendment and the right to petition was to petition your representatives in the legislature. We've changed that. We now believe that you're supposed to petition the judiciary. You type up a lawsuit. No. You write down what damaged you, and you were supposed to present it to your representatives, and they were supposed to take care of the problem. That's presumed to be lost at this point in time. Perhaps the best authority was a U.S. Supreme Court case called U.S. versus Cruikshank. The right of people peacefully to assemble for the purpose of petitioning Congress for a redress of grievances or for anything else connected with the powers or duties of national government is an attribute of national citizenship, and as such, under the protection of and guaranteed by the United States. The very idea of government, Republican in form, implies a right on the part of the citizens to meet peacefully for the consultation in respect to the public affairs and to petition for redress of grievances. Government, Republican in form, means your ability to get actual redress. That's gone. Until you actually get representation restored, you will not have it back. And again, as I say, every other reform that you try and go for will be in vain unless you actually cure this one ailment. Let me see here. Anybody else want to field a question?
We were talking previously, you were talking about the the idea that if you have a very large representation, a number of representatives, that it's very difficult for those people to come to consensus. And I'm thinking that's exactly what I want.
Yes.
Because the fewer laws they make, that means the fewer liberties they can steal.
Oh, come on. You want more laws, don't you? More laws are good, right? No.
The basic function of government is to protect the natural rights of citizens, period.
Yes. I'll make a quick anecdote on that. New Hampshire, which has 400 reps, and I've spent a lot of time researching New Hampshire. When you have a lot of representatives, what happens is very few laws get passed. Very few. In fact, I've been told by some of the reps, and I can't verify this, but what they tell me is there are times in which they actually have years in which they knock out more laws than create. They actually give a steak dinner to the guy every year who knocks out the most laws. They have enough reps that they can actually sit down and look through all the laws. In California, it is unheard of for the legislature to knock out a law. I mean, there will be a law that might be controversial and get pushed through, and then the legislature might change a few years later. And it's like they don't think to themselves, hey, now we've got a new majority, we can toss it. No, that's gone. They forgot about it. They're just making more. I forget how many, as many as 4,000 in any given year can be made. More laws is not liberty. And I think it was Hannibal, Caesar Hannibal, who said that if you ever want to look to how corrupt a country is, you look to its laws. Yeah, more laws are not liberty. Let me see here. There's another great quote. In a representative democracy such as this, the branches of government act on behalf of the people, and to a very large extent, the whole concept of representation depends upon the ability of the people to make their wishes known to their representatives. There's a great anecdote I have on petitioning. Petitioning disappeared around, I would say, the 1850s. I mean, we can all theorize that it still exists. I guess it does. What sometimes happens is when you write your reps, they'll have a form letter, and it's even worse than that. Not only do they have a form letter, they have a machine, and we sort of fondly call it RoboPen. And it's, it almost looks like that, and you just put a stack of papers and it, signs them and to make you think that your rep actually looked at it. But anyway, the original fight on the issue of petitioning was between John Quincy Adams and John Calhoun. John Quincy Adams said, your right to control government goes insofar as to your ability to vote for your representative, and then once they're elected, to petition them. And he said, once you petition them, you had an affirmative right to a hearing in the legislature upon your petition, much like it was a courtroom. And that used to happen in all the legislatures in America. John Calhoun said no. He said the right to petition extends insofar only to you giving your petition to your representative. What he did was up to him. John Calhoun was defending slavery. And that was one of the biggest issues that our founders, and it was really post-founder time, it was sort of the early to mid, 1810 to 1830, roughly in there, before the Civil War. And John Calhoun won out. And the reality was, because we don't increase the number of reps, for the most part, they ignore our petitions. So if you want to have your petitions heard, or even have a chance to have them heard, you need more representatives. So petitioning. That's petitioning and getting your matter redressed. That's the first duty. The second duty is to investigate. The most powerful authority I have on that topic. It is the proper duty of a representative body to look diligently in every affair of government and talk much about what it sees. It is meant to be the eyes, the ears, the voice, to embody the wisdom and will of its constituents. Unless Congress have and use every means of equating itself with the acts and disposition of the administrative agents of government, the country must be helpless to learn how it is being served. And unless Congress both scrutinize these things and sift them from every form of discussion, the country must remain in embarrassing, crippling ignorance of the very affairs which is most important, and they should understand and direct. The informing function of Congress should be preferred even to the legislative function. It is the duty, the power of your legislature to haul in front of its committees and haul in front of the whole body, if need be, the executive, to grill them, to cross-examine, subpoena, ask, how are you spending my money? What are you doing? To look over them. Does everybody here remember the Madoff scandal? And this is something where I get back to, where it said the executive and judiciary are few in number, the legislature, on the other hand, is numerous. We have more federal agencies now than we have reps in Congress. So when you see the SEC and you see various members downloading pornography, using federal computers, and I guess that was the light side. You had lawyers who weren't even current with the bar to prosecute people for security fraud. You had members of the SEC who weren't even able to investigate. They were running their own businesses. And you had whistleblowers going to the SEC as many as 5 times, finally giving up and saying, we're not going to the New York Fed, we're now going to the Boston SEC. Because we believe Madoff owns the New York department. And them getting ignored. These guys had solid evidence this guy couldn't have been doing what he was doing. There was no way he had to be running a Ponzi scheme at least 5 times. Solid evidence. And no one. And the reality is Congress didn't even have enough members to investigate the SEC to see if they were actually, name all your alphabet soup. The EPA, the IRS. Are these agencies being investigated? Are they actually saying, were you damaged by that agency? We have a petition here. No, doesn't even happen. And that is the central figure, the most important aspect of a legislature. It has to be numerous enough to grill these people. It has to be numerous enough to call these. And I'm here to tell you, it's been 100 years since the U.S. House has increased in size. 100 years. If we tripled the U.S. House, it is my belief that numerous federal agencies would disappear now, right like that, and should. These federal agencies, and it's at the state level too, they start competing with regular business. Not only do they get us to pay taxes to support them, they start running their competition out. And then all of a sudden they start demanding more and more money for their retirement accounts. And on the other side, since they're not being investigated, they're certainly not doing their duty. So we're paying people effectively to not do what they're supposed to be doing. And in the worst case scenarios, we have government agencies that are actually facilitating the people who are damaging us. And I always stop and I say, I'm making it up. It can't be that bad, can it? And yet we see this stuff in the paper every day. It goes on all the time. You want to stop it? You increase representation. Okay, let me see here. Another great quote, Jefferson. Jefferson, in a letter to Madison dated December 20th, 1787, posed the question whether peace is best preserved by giving energy to the government or information to the people, and then answered, this last is the most certain and most legitimate engine of government. So we have Jefferson in a letter to Madison saying that giving information to the citizens is the most legitimate engine of government. It is the most legitimate function. And yet that is the one thing that we don't get. We don't get any information. I like going back to that other quote. We are in embarrassing, crippling ignorance to the very affairs that we should understand. Let me see here. Committee oversight. This is one of my favorites, and I get into this. It is one of the effects of poor representation. So the job of a legislative rep is to investigate and inform. So I pretty well nailed that. So the fact of the matter is we have 80 assembly members in California. And I think it was in 2009 I did research and I picked out the worst, I wouldn't call him offender, the person who just happened to have the most assignments. And it's just off the wall. So the man's name was Curran Price, and this has nothing to do with him. The reality is it's probably the Speaker of the House that assigned him all this. And well, let me get into it. So, Curran Price, he sat on the following committees. So, he had 8 of them. Business and Professions, Elections and Redistricting, Governmental Organization, Jobs, Economic Development, Utilities, Legislative Ethics, Select Committee of Procurement, and he was on the Census Committee. So, those are the 8 committees he had. And now, when you break out all the duties, this is what he was charged with. He was in charge of Consumer Protection, the Department of Consumer Affairs, Occupational Licensing Medical, Occupational Medicine, Occupational Licensing Non-Medical, Private Post-Secondary and Vocational Education, Elimination and Creation of Regulatory Agencies, Administrative Procurement, Office Administrative Law, State Procurement, State and Local Property Procurement, Efficiency Cost Control, Charitable Solicitations, Product Labeling, Weights and Measures, Accuracy and Product Pricing, Elections, Redistricting, Public public records. And public records includes all 1,081 recognized municipalities across the state. Natural disasters, tobacco products, census, business advocacy in California, business advocacy in the United States, California-Mexico relations, California overseas trade, expansion of new technologies, economic disaster relief, economic impact reports, balance of trade issues, enterprise zones, expansion of overseas markets, foreign investment in California, foreign investment by Californians, information technology, industrial innovation, industrial research, utilities. He was in charge of commerce matters, cable television stations, tourism, and I'm shortening this. He was also co-chair of the ethics committee. Question.
Just to clarify, this is one
representative
who has he's just a guy from Fairfield, possibly.
Yeah.
No special
Bay Area. One person. One person.
For the state of California.
For one person was on these 8 committees that were in charge of all these things for the entire state. So one of those was just the utilities. So name your utilities. We got waterworks, right? Let's go back to monopoly, right? Waterworks, we got the electric company. How many utilities up and down the state?
Yes.
Tons. So just that one thing, tons. There is no way he's investigating anything. So when you read about, like recently our courts, we just learned that they blew $500 million on their court system, on creating their computer information system. You can't even begin to wonder why. Because there's no way that any one rep can watch. The real question is, what else did we blow $500 billion on, or $500 million that we just haven't been told about? It's all over the place. So when you have one rep, and I like to make the point, he was on 60 sub-jurisdictions that were all massive, and on top of that, oh, by the way, he also had 500,000 constituents. You think he's talking to any of them? Well, a few of them that gave the big checks of $10,000 or whatever else.
So he was so busy that he just had to play golf all the time.
Well, yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it is. And then what I like to clarify this, so you thought that was bad? The Senate has half as many members and twice as many duties, because both the House and the Senate are supposed to look over the same things. There's supposed to be redundancy. So a senator is on twice as many committees and has representation of twice as many people. So each senator would have 1 million and twice as many as, maybe not twice exactly, but so the whole point is there's just no way. So you ever wonder why there's no investigations? There's no way 48 can do it. Maybe when a news writer catches on to some scandal, they'll throw together a quick committee and they'll do it in a day or so. That person will quit. And case closed, all solved. So there you go. Anyway, I like showing all this because most people, when you really break things out, when you really look at these things and you isolate each thing and really show, you want to know why everything's screwed up? There you go. Because 40 and 80, because 435 and 100 U.S. senators. Unless you fix that, we're basically toast. Let me see here. And I guess in New Hampshire, which I go back to, each rep was on 2 committees, and each committee had 1 to 2 jurisdictions. So that's it. It's manageable, and then you got time. You know what you're doing? You're looking through all the old laws. Your constituents are coming to you, and you can actually talk to them. So there you go. Let me see here. Bicameralism, I guess I'll touch on this. I'm a big believer in bicameralism. I guess I could call myself a radical if anybody even felt that the issue was worth discussing, but I believe city councils should be bicameral. I really do. So not only should we have a lot more reps, but there should be 2 chambers. We're so far away from that, it's not even funny. But just one good quote, and this is from our convention in 1849 in California. "We are sent here to prepare them for a system in which they can enact laws for themselves. No civilized people pretend to pass laws without at least making them run the gauntlet of 2 houses, differently constituted." So the idea is you have, I guess, what do they say, the finest steel goes to the hottest fire? So if you have 2 chambers, and differently, we don't have different chambers right now. We just have population chambers. We should have, and we could legally have representation at each county. So each senator have a county, and the lower chamber have population, but we haven't. But you should have each law go through twice. We have a system of log rolling right now in which everybody, who can, they get paid to pass the statute they do, and then they say to their buddy, "I'll vote for yours if you vote for mine." very little debate goes into effect into any of these laws that get brought down on all of us. And even the worst part about it is, if a bad law gets passed later, it's almost like you can't bring it up. No one can re-examine it. They're too busy trying to pass more bad laws. So, anyway, so on to the next one. Here's one. This is one of my favorite, and I've sort of alluded to this, if not overtly, all throughout this. But it's district size and corruption, flat out. The bigger the district size, the more corrupt. There's a great quote by the Anti-Federalist. He says, "Clear it is, by increasing representation, we lessen the prospects of each member of Congress being provided for in public offices. We proportionally lessen official influence and strengthen his prospects of being a private citizen, subject to the common burdens without compensation of the emoluments of office. By increasing representation, we make it more difficult to corrupt and influence the members. We diffuse them more extensively among the body of the people, perfect the balance, multiply the information, strengthen the confidence of the people, and consequently support the laws on equal and free principles." Federal Farmer, Maryland Gazette, January 4th, 1788. So as he was fighting 40,000 and 30,000, which he didn't feel was adequate representation, he gives us a clear understanding of why. You increase the number of reps, they become more like us. You decrease the number of reps, the more they become like the executive branch, the more they start providing for themselves, the more they start voting the public monies for themselves. Clear and simple. The bigger the district, the more corrupt. One of my favorite examples that I like to show people is Government Code 25,000A. It says, every county shall have 5 supervisors. So we have, on one end of the spectrum, Alpine County, which has 1,200 people, and they have 5 supervisors. On the other hand, we have LA County, which has 10 million people, and they have 5 supervisors. They got 1 supervisor for every 2 million people. In all of this stuff, you kind of start making your own philosophy on this. You notice how we have a lot of gangs? I've sort of got my own running theory that a lot of gangs are a symptom of lack of representation. Where are the most gangs in America? LA County, where you got the least representation of anyone. Can't prove it, at least not yet, haven't spent the time. But I believe that. I believe that when you have a lot more reps, society becomes more cohesive. You work out your problems, you sort out your differences, and you take care of your issues. If you've noticed today, we have more problems than we can ever even get to solve. And that's where we're at. All right, I'm going to field another question because, damn it, I need to. So. Anybody else got anything? Anybody? Go for it.
If we migrated to a part-time legislature, would that improve or worsen the problem?
Question on the floor is, would moving to a part-time legislature make things better? Right now there is an initiative, a referendum that's being proposed, I think, by Shannon Grove and I guess Ted Costa. And the proposal is to move us to a part-time legislature. The big problem is a legislature has a certain amount of business to do. If you have a tiny legislature, in effect, they almost have to stay in session just to begin to deal with it. I like their petition. Not only for the idea that they would meet less, but it also strikes down their salary, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I think it would be healthy. When you have a lot of reps, you meet less often. One of the biggest things, and when I've done all my research, I go through history. And there was a time, I think it was called the Long Parliament in England, and it was when Henry VIII was at war with the Pope. He needed to sit Parliament for 7 years. There was a big schism. Almost most of England was Catholic. And he needed Parliament sitting to fight that internal enemy, to be able to reinforce, I guess, their own English values. So there are times in which you need to sit. If we expanded representation, I would want them to be able to sit for a while. I'd want them to go through our laws right now. Start knocking them out. I would want them to investigate there's over 560 agencies in California. So maybe we would need to do large investigations. My better choice would be to increase representation first and then go for a short-term legislature. I don't know if we can. So I guess the quicker issue is, I believe I like the initiative. It may not be the best thing, but if we were able to keep them out, because there is an aspect, the longer they are spending in Sacramento, the more we are getting damaged. So, I mean, I do support it for that reason. So, anyway, moving right along. District size and spending. Wonderful paper done by a gentleman at the Mises Institute, Mark Thornton, Dr. Thornton. He showed, and he said this in 1999 figures, if you add one more rep to the lower chamber, he said government spending in that state would drop by $5 million. And if you added one more rep to each Senate seat, and they knocked Nebraska out of this calculation, it would drop spending by $40 million. And he just said the simple principle is this. Like I said earlier, if you have to pass a bill in California, you need 41 in the lower chamber and 21 in the upper chamber. If you add another rep, it becomes just a little bit harder. So guess what? A few of those bills that would have made it won't make it. When you add more reps, all of a sudden that source that you want to tax is not going to be taxed. Powerful, powerful, powerful. I'll reiterate, in $1999, if you added one more rep, government spending would drop by $5 million. If you added one more rep to the upper chamber, $40 million. And I guarantee you in California, that figure would be even higher. So, more representation would not cost us more. A lot of people believe that. No. We would spend less. We would spend less in tax dollars. District size and electoral spending. This is a really important thing, especially for people who advocate for third parties. The bigger the district, the more money you need to run. And I've done a really good analysis on a wide variety of states over a 4-year period of time. You have New Hampshire, the winners spend $1,000. The losers spend $1,000. And the average district size, if they had all had single-member districts, is 3,000 people. When you get up to Vermont, where the districts are 4,000, the winners are spending $2,000. The losers are spending $2,000. Not only that, turnover drops. So it becomes more difficult to unseat an incumbent. The bigger the district, the harder it is to beat an incumbent. Not only that, but the citizens don't know who's running. And you start depending on R or D. You start looking up and down the ballot and you'll vote for somebody because they're a certain political race. When the district gets smaller, you get to say, well, that's Joe. Or that's James. And you can say, I know that person, I trust him, and you're voting for him because you trust him. And again, they get to inform you, they get to tell you what's going on. Crucial, what we're so far from. So when the district size get really big, especially like in California, the winners are spending, at this point in time, 10-to-1 to what the losers are spending. So I think it was 1998 in California, the district size were 410,000. 2 years later, they were already at 425,000. So these districts are impossible to begin with, and they're increasing by 10 to 15,000 people per election. If you're going to challenge an incumbent, how in the heck are you going to do that? They don't even take you as a credible challenge unless you have millions of dollars you're ready to throw at it. And oddly enough, they seem to be able to match you when it comes time to it. So anyway, there are more third-party members in states like Vermont and New Hampshire that actually get elected because you can afford to. The common citizen has the ability to run in a small district. You can raise $1,000. In a district like California has, where you have 500,000 people, you can't. The other consequence is that turnover drops. So in New Hampshire, 1 in 3 lose office each election. Vermont, 1 in 4. And in California, in the last 10 years, only 1 incumbent has lost. We have elections to say we have elections. If no one loses, then what do they matter? I guess the favorability rating in California dropped to 15% at one point in time. 15%. And everybody gets reelected. Carol Mignon is the only person who has lost, the only incumbent who's lost in 10 years. The legislature is not likely to remedy this. There are 2 ways that we can do it. One, through a lawsuit, or the other way is through, you can actually go through the courts and do it. Most important is to tell people about this. I spent a lot of time with all the charts that I have showing people, and people are shocked to see this. The most important thing to start with is to show people this is a problem. For a lot of you in this audience here, this is probably the first time you've ever seen this. You know, when I show people what the district size is, when I say George Washington said 30,000, when I show them that the Federalist Papers show that the state level is supposed to be 3,000, it's a shock to them. And when you start thinking about it, and start thinking about the way a representative government is supposed to work, it starts to make sense. So, the first thing I got to do is educate, and then I got to energize, and then we got to do it. But the most important thing is to know why. And I think for a lot of people it's refreshing. I mean, it's almost like you feel like you're crazy. Like, why is government acting so badly? Well, here you go. You want to know why? Because we got 40 senators and 80 assembly members, and they don't do what you need to be done.
They have no interest in doing that. They have no need to.
Yeah, no. When the districts get huge like they're at, the game then becomes, how do we pass a law to get money to Frank to kick it back to me? And that's what they're doing. Almost everything seems to be a big game. And at the end, all the contractors who got paid, well, they're gone. The contracts were written in such a way that you can't get accountability, and the money is gone. And, you know, and if you really did a close audit, a lot of the money that we paid for these things that came up, fruitless for us, probably found its way into the coffers of the re-election committee.
So the object is to stay in power.
The object is to stay in power as much as you possibly can. I'll touch on this topic really quick. District size goes with the number of laws you created. And I touched on it earlier, but I'll reemphasize. When you increase the number of reps, the reps are not only able to take petitions from you, but they're able to re-examine the laws that we have passed. And what happens is they're actually able to go through the old laws. And if you have a law that nags you or that you don't like or damages you, you can petition your rep and they can go back and strike the law. Generally, when you strike a law in this day and age, it's only because a lawyer ran into it and they actually moved to strike it through the courts. The legislature is a place that can knock out laws. The executive happened quite a bit. John Calhoun, in another instance that wasn't so bad, perhaps colors it better, he was talking to, who's on our $20 bill? Jackson, yes. Andrew Jackson was president, and there was a law that specifically harmed South Carolina, and Calhoun took it to Jackson, and he struck it down himself. I mean, I'll even give you guys an even more radical concept on this. There's a wonderful, wonderful article by Sarah Blige Builder in the Yale Law Journal, and she basically makes the argument that any one chamber can knock down a law. So if a law exists, and let's say a state senate, you can get a majority in the Senate to knock it out, her argument is it would be knocked out. So in effect, for a law to be solid ground, you need all three chambers to be able to sustain it at any given time. If it's a good law, you shouldn't have to be able to worry about that. As we said, more law is not liberty. More reps you have, not only will the fewer bills come through. There is this one article, I mean, it's staggering to read it, by a guy who writes for the Wall Street Journal. He says, on any given day, you and I are engaged in 3 felonies. Whether you know it or not, you are engaged in as many as 3 felonies. It is not liberty, from what our founders felt, that at any point in time, a federal agent can swoop down and press charges on you. And that's where we're at today. When you have so many laws and you don't even know you're breaking a law, and that they can bring up, I guess Rand Paul right now is attempting to pass a law that he's trying to bring what's called mens rea back into account, which actually means prove intent. If you are picking up Indian, what are those, Indian arrowheads, and you've just committed a felony at the federal level and you didn't even know it, why, what resources are we now taxing you to put a guy in jail, in prison, who doesn't deserve to be there? And then what are we saying to the citizen that on a random basis you can get whacked for, some federal law that you didn't even know was passed and really shouldn't have been applied to you? I mean, it comes down to how malicious are the agents in the federal government. And, there's that one case that I've been watching. And I guess it finally got reversed, and these people bought this land in Colorado, and they started developing it, and they started using local development rules, and all of a sudden the EPA came in and said, no, it was a watershed or something like that. And they're like, no, it's not. And the EPA just hammered them for years, and finally went to the Supreme Court and finally got reversed. But I mean, the idea that, again, a federal agency, which are more numerous than the number of reps we have, can come in with one agent and hit you. And what's even worse than that, when I was watching, where we had the debates just recently over the Obamacare, the Obama bill, and they have, I guess, they have a federal law on how federal agencies create more federal laws. So it's not even the legislature making laws, it's these agencies that are more numerous than the legislature who not only enforce the law, but are making it on top of that. That's dangerous. That gets into the separation of power and other issues that are very key to our founders, because it's supposed to be the legislature writing them, the executive enforcing them, and the judiciary interpreting them. But we're so far from that at this point in time that, you know, it's almost not feasible. But if you increase the number of reps, we could get that again. So there you go. District size and salaries. Solid correlation. Bigger the districts, the more you pay the reps. Not only that, the more assistants they have, not only that, the more you pay the assistants. Just recently, California had their legislature somehow lowered their salary, and I forget how it went. And we actually have an agency that monitors their salary, and I'm not really convinced that it's constitutional, but nonetheless, it exists. And apparently, before this lowering happened, each of our assembly members got paid $119,000 per year. Whether they should have or not, they got a free car, free gas. They got their own office, which I something like $1 million per year for office and staff. And that changes depending on where you're at, because obviously it's more expensive in other places. Free car, free gas, and as I like to say, before graft. No, I'm making it up, right? They don't get paid graft, do they? They do. So, $129,000, free car, free gas, $1 million for your office before you get your handouts, for passing all these special bills. And to top it all off, the coup de grace, they ignore you afterwards. So when you're sending your petitions, they say, I'm sorry, we're not really interested. We didn't get the $10,000 check from you. New Hampshire, on the other hand, they pay their reps $100 per year. And they get a little bit of gas money to go to Concord. There is a direct correlation between how many reps you have, the size of their district, and what they get paid. And to top it all off, I have lots of correspondence with reps in New Hampshire. So as I'm sitting in federal court on this case, I've got 16 petitions, proofs of service, all of them ignored, and I've got emails from reps in a state 3,000 miles away. Phenomenal. District size and salaries. You have more reps, guess what? So, and that's one of the things that people worry about. Well, if we increase the number of reps, how will we ever pay for them? Guess what? Their money goes down. It has to. There's no way we can, and we shouldn't. It's repugnant, the idea that we pay a guy $120,000 to ignore us. And that's where we're at. That's where we're at. No, I'm making it up, right? No, that's where we're at. Let me see here. Got a couple more issues I want to touch on, and then I guess it's no great representative assembly at the present day can do all its work in a full meeting. It has neither the time, the patience, nor the knowledge required. Its sittings ought not be frittered away in discussing proposals that have no chance of success, while measures that are to be brought forth to the whole body ought to be threshed out beforehand, their provisions carefully weighed out and put into precise language, objections if possible met, and concessions and compromise or brought to a sharp difference of principle. In short, they ought to be put out in such a shape that the assembly is only called upon to decide a small number of perfectly definite questions. To enable it to do so intelligently, it may necessarily also collect information about doubtful facts. So we're back to the investigating function. Modern assemblies have sought to accomplish these results mainly by committees of some kind. And in England, where the parliamentary form of government has reached a higher development than anywhere else, the chief instrument for the purpose is the informal joint committee of the House and the Senate, known as the Cabinet. But unless Parliament were very nearly reduced to the role of criticizing ministers and answering yes or no to a series of questions propounded them, it must do its work through other committees. So that was A. Lawrence Lowell. He was president of Harvard, and I think it was 1906 when he wrote that. But he's saying you can't really have everybody meet at once. So when we talk about how wieldy would a large legislature be, it can be very wieldy. You put it in Curran Price with his, 60 jurisdictions. If we had a single person do one job, just the utilities, we'd be better off than him handling the utilities and everything else he had. The reality is, the utility committee should probably have a good 30 people on it. Probably more. If I had to think about it, I'm sure there's probably at least 700 utilities up and down the state. We should have a rep looking at them at least once every 2 years. We don't even have one rep that can undivide his time on that. And chances are he's hiring assistants that don't look into it either. And you got the executive branch that's managing these things that no one's watching. And that's where we're at. Let me see here. I guess that's pretty much it. Questions? Let's hear them. Let's go for it. You? No, I want you. He's asked 3. He's you.
When you were speaking about how to affect this, you said you could either bring a lawsuit, go through the courts. How do the courts get jurisdiction over a constitutional issue of representation? Very,
very easily. One of the most constitutional principles is you have a material interest in maintaining the value of your vote. Because you're the age you are, you're much older than I am, you've been damaged even more than I have. I started voting when I was 18. That was about 18 years ago. The district size then was about 400,000. The district size for you was much smaller. Your vote loses value. The original clause in the U.S. Constitution and the way they apportioned Congress until 1870 was 1 rep for every, and it started at 30,000. And even when they rewrote it later, they would say 40,000, which you're still getting damaged. But you have a material interest in maintaining the value of a vote. I do not believe that it is constitutional for you to say, and things can be written as law and sit there for a long time until it's challenged. But I don't think it's constitutional to say 40 and 80. Because as the population grows, your vote devalues. I believe that at certain points in time, when you hit a certain level in the population, they say, all right, we need another guy. We're certainly not doing that. The courts in this one case called Davis versus Bandemir said that you can reapportion your legislature as many times as you want between the census. I think Justice White wrote the opinion. It was 1986, and he said there is no provision in the Constitution that prohibits you from redistricting multiple times. Absolutely. So that's one way in which this provision can be taken up. There's a great case, U.S. Department of Commerce versus U.S. House of Representatives. Hell, you have a material interest in maintaining the value of your vote. That's the way I would attack it.
For the sake of the video, can you explain why it's dangerous to have such a small number of representatives as opposed to a large number of representatives?
It is dangerous to have a small representation like we have, because in the end, it is the job of your legislature to defend your liberties, to defend your rights. Again, I'll go back to that wonderful code, Government Code 25,000A. Every county shall have 5. Probably okay for Alpine County. Probably good, healthy representation. I'll bet money that 90% of the people in Alpine County, and I guess population's 1,100, I'll bet you 1,000 people know who their reps are. When you get to larger jurisdictions, no one knows who their reps are. There was a great study done by a professor at Yale, Professor Dahl, and he got into Europe, into various countries that had really good representation. He found that the citizens knew what their rights were. They knew what their liberties were. They knew what local laws were, local customs were. They knew who ran for office. They knew who ran against them. When you get small districts, you start learning things. For those people who are so inclined, there's a wonderful clause in the Bible that says, one man sharpens another. When you have a lot of representation, you start interacting. You start discussing things. You start developing interests. The informing function becomes really powerful. You know what? I'll get into this. This is really powerful. When you have a lot of reps and you have small districts, the reps know who voted. And they start going to the people who haven't, because it now matters. Where the districts are so big, you can't know, the incumbent just knocks the other guy out. Gets as many to vote, and he doesn't care who doesn't vote. When the districts are small, they start saying, you know, you didn't vote. What can I do for you? And they start, where ordinarily, the way elections work in large districts, I can't make this up. What they'll say is, we're only going to target voters who voted 4 out of the last 4 elections. If they have time, maybe they'll go for people who voted 3 out of the last 4 as a high proclivity voter. But if you haven't proven that you haven't gone 4 out of 4 voters, they're not going to bother talking to you. Let me read to you this really quickly. This is an email I sent to a rep in New Hampshire. Her name was Marjorie Smith. She was a Democrat. For 2 years, the Democrats, for the first time in 100 years, took over the legislature in New Hampshire. And the Republicans had both chambers for about 100 years. And it was kind of interesting. They had done some things that weren't really liberty inclined, so the Democrats got in. And while the Democrats were in, they started, I don't know if they passed the laws, but they suggested passing, making it mandatory to have a seatbelt in your vehicle, make insurance mandatory, make helmets on a motorcycle mandatory. All these things you can do in New Hampshire. You can drive your car without insurance. If you get in a wreck with somebody, you got to work it out with them. It's not mandatory. Some people have grown accustomed to these things, but when you look at liberty in its truest form, that's what it looks like. It means self-responsibility. It doesn't mean mandates. But if you get on that motorcycle and you crash, you better find a way to take care of it. But that is individual responsibility. They have, in both Vermont and New Hampshire, the most, I don't know if they're the most, but they're definitely some of the highest gun rights. In fact, recently in New Hampshire, they made it so you can bring a gun in your own legislature. Wow. This is truly liberty. Even Vermont, which is a blue state, highly liberal, when you have good representation, you find out that even they like to protect themselves. It's not just Rosie O'Donnell who wants to yell at the, certain people for, supporting guns and then, having her own protection. When you get into good representation, your civil liberties start taking off. Your ability to enforce them starts going up. Powerful, powerful. Anyway, so in New Hampshire, we had, I sent this email to Marjorie Smith, and she was the head of the budget committee. And I said, what does the New Hampshire budget look like this year? And I sent the email on 8/10/08. What does the New Hampshire budget look like this year? Is it a deficit or is it flush? I heard that last year the New Hampshire budget was in a surplus of $40,000. Is this true? So on 8/10/08. On 8/11/08, I get an answer. I'd be happy to answer your questions. I need a little more information. And on. The next day, I get an answer from the chairman of the finance committee. The chairman of the budget committee sends me an answer personally. It's not her assistant, it's her. This is what you get when you have representation. You almost can't believe it. I mean, like when I'm getting these emails back, I'm getting giddy. I mean, it's like you can't fathom these things. Unsolicited, 5/24/07. Ken Weiler. Dear Michael, Dick Marple, who is another rep in the legislature, has forwarded me your message about trying to increase the size of the California House. I've been in the New Hampshire House since 1990. I've seen bills to decrease the number of reps from 400 to 200 and increase the size of our Senate from 24 to 48. For the decrease, the reps voted as if somebody was trying to take away their seats, and they killed the bill. For the Senate, where people never have enough time to serve effectively in their 3 or 4 committees, they have 3 or 4 committees. Our senators can't even think straight. They killed the bill for fear it would take away their power. Unsolicited, I got an email from a rep because he talked to another rep in New Hampshire about what I was doing here. Anybody on accident contact you from the state senate in California? How many reps have run from you because they're worried that you might pull them to the side and tell them about problems you have? In New Hampshire, they actually take care of problems. It's staggering. When I got this email, unsolicited, just sent me an email. It was out of the blue. This is just amazing. It says, thank you, voters. To the editor, I want to take this opportunity to commend the voters of Senate District 2 for their excellent turnout at the polls November 5th. I believe the campaign was one of issues and conducted in a manner that New Hampshire voters expect and respect. To the voters that supported me, thank you. To all the voters, my goal is to continue and be an avid supporter of the North County and to be available at all times on your behalf. Please feel free to reach me in Concord at 271-2641 or at home, 279-6492. on any matter of concern that is important to you. Remember, there is strength in numbers. Carl Johnson, Senator-elect District 2. I can't make this up. I can't make this up. Call me at home. Well, this is several years back, but this is an editorial. By the way, everybody, I just won. I'm your rep. This is my home number. Contact me if you've got a problem. I'll help you. That's the way it should be. I can't emphasize that enough. What's the one thing they got? Representation. My friend Dick Marple wrote this excellent piece. Fantastic. As you requested, I've drafted this statement with my opinion of representation in the California Assembly. I'm a member of New Hampshire's lower representative body, the House of Representatives. There are 400 of us, which translates into approximately one representative for every 3,000 citizens of this state. In such formed body, I have the ability to meet with most of my constituents who are of voting age, and know most that are not as well. I think this is noteworthy and important, a well-functioning body which is not unlike a House of Commons. We have the ability to know the needs and the problems of those we represent, and I believe that is essential to my position. Of our membership of 400, only about 15 to 20 of those elected are lawyers. Of their 400, only 15 to 20 are lawyers. The rest are people of varying backgrounds. As such a large body, we have the ability to oversee the functions of the executive as well as the judiciary and act as a check to their power with respect for their treatment of our constituents. We are also smaller groups gathered each year in our several counties in New Hampshire, and it has at least one representative, and take the time to meet with their boards of supervisors to help shape the budgets for those counties with regards to monies given to each county. We are paid $100 per diem to serve those which we represent per year, and that is fair compensation. California Constitution Article 4, Section 2A, Part 2 states in part, the California Assembly has a membership of 80 members elected for 2-year terms. This affords no real access or protection to the citizens of California. This is especially true when you consider the population, which to my knowledge is reaching 400 or 40 million people. This leaves each Assembly member representing between 400 and 500,000 constituents, including undocumented aliens. The Assembly members in California's lower chamber cannot possibly do their job. I also do not believe that increasing the number of staff members for each of these members is an appropriate remedy either. Citizens should have direct access to the representative, not their staff. The only hired staff we have in New Hampshire are for our committees. I believe California would have fewer problems if the representation in the Assembly is increased many times over. I hope this problem is remedied soon. Dick Marple, Hooksett, New Hampshire. That's it. The problems we have in California are because we have 40 and 80. It's been 150 years since the Senate was increased to 40 members. The population went from approximately 500,000 to today between 38 and 40 million people. Each representative has 1 million. There's no way they can do their job.
To take this down to a smaller level, I live in a town of 100,000 people and I got 5 councilmen. Is my representation okay in that?
Absolutely not. Yes, not only was it the case that at the state level, one rep should represent about 3,000 people, at the local level, because as our founders noted, it was sort of like a pyramid. At each level, government should come closer, particularly in the legislative branch. Another thing that's happened, not only at the local level do you have inadequate representation. Again, my poster child is LA County with 5 supervisors. And I guess a wonderful anecdote, I was actually talking to Mark Meckler the other day, and we were comparing notes on LA County. They have a law now that if you bring a football or a volleyball on the beach, $1,500.
Why?
A fine. Well, because there's a lot of people. But I mean, what if it's you and me out on there and we're throwing a football? You have just given any cop, the executive branch, the ability to write you a ticket for $1,500. One of the things I like to see when I see, a fine, criminal action against somebody, I like to see a damaged party. I don't want to see these arbitrary things, because you bought those shoes from a nation that we have sanctions with, we're going to prosecute you, or some random thing that just gets brought against you. I like to see a damaged party. You and I are throwing a football, kind of consistent with the idea of liberty, the way our founders proposed, and yet we're out allowing 5 people, of which 3 as a majority can write a law that can hit you with a fine for $1,500. Local government. Not only do they not have enough reps, they tend to run at large. And I actually did a study, a friend of mine, she went through all the cities. 90% of our cities are elected at large. What they like to tell you is, since we're elected at large, what they like to say is, we are represented by all of us. And what will happen is, when you email all of them, they will all equally ignore you. No kidding. They will equally ignore you. You need single-member districts. The mayor, the chief executive, is the only person who should be elected in the whole municipality. Everybody else should have a district. The other trend that's crazy, 4-year terms. Our founders in the Federalist Papers argue with the Anti-Federalists about 2-year terms of the U.S. House. The Anti-Federalists, like, they're going to be in there for 2 years, they forget you, they do what they want. Well, at the local level, we have 4-year terms. You can't even begin to count the number of times they'll harm you. Vote in a manner that, is inconsistent with what you or anybody else in your district would want, and then 4 years later they start behaving themselves, but it doesn't matter because they're going to be outvoted by the other people who have 4-year terms. So, shortening of terms. I mean, cities, yes. I mean, we don't even have judges for local municipalities. You used to have municipal courts. For some reason or another, they combined them, and municipal judges who were making 120, 130,000 were all of a sudden making 180,000. We increased the cost of the judiciary, and so now, if you get a traffic ticket and you want to fight it, you're not even in a local judge. You have to hear, the guy who's making 180,000. And what do? They rule against you really quickly, unless you're really lucky, or or who knows. So this, the government. I started this whole talk on the idea of structuralism. Paramount, even to the liberties that you want to define. If the Constitution, if we want to call it this, is a contract that we all want to agree, the First Amendment allows us to have free speech, the freedom of conscience, free religion, Seventh Amendment, the right to a jury trial, to not just be tossed in a jail cell at a random basis. If you want those, it's not good enough just to write that down. It has to be reinforced. The structure of government has to be built right. The executive and judiciary must be few in numbers. The legislature must be numerous. They must be at your beck and call. You must know who they are. And if they don't take care of your needs, you need to vote them out now. You need to be able to vote them out now. Short terms, local access, small districts, your ability to petition them, meet with them, to know that when you're spending your dollar, that they're accountable for it. All these things are completely intertwined. There is no other reform that you're going to be able to put forward that will actually work unless you fix representation. And everybody seems to be running in all different directions. You increase representation, these things will begin to get fixed. The places that have representation are fixed. Places that have really good representation. Go back to New Hampshire and Vermont. They have more impeachments than anyone else. They got more removals after impeachments. You get a lot of places that'll do an impeachment and won't actually remove. I mean, look what Blagojevich had to do. He had to sell a Senate seat, and God knows what else he had to do just to get tossed. They said, well, if you don't step down, then we'll impeach you. Well, shoot, they should have been investigating him long before that. Yeah, well, each member in their legislature has 100,000 people. You get down to small districts in New Hampshire. If somebody gets damaged by a member of the executive branch or a judge, they treat it as though they got damaged. And they'll begin to investigate. Most important duties of a representative body. 1, to take petitions for redress of grievances. 2, to investigate and inform. It's that informing function that should be preferred even to the legislative function. We got more laws and less investigation. More laws.
It really is a fiduciary relationship.
Yes. It's agency. Yeah. Having representative doesn't mean we've got somebody, well, here, he is my rep. That doesn't cut it. He should respond to you, he should answer to you, and if he doesn't, you need to get him out now. And that's where the big problems exist today. Yeah. I got one more thing, I'll just say it, because it is, there's just so many powerful things, and even when I talk to people, everybody has their own favorite thing. This is one of my favorite things. The argument that the British had for us, they were upset because we had a lot of legislatures coming together, and there were all these people, they were getting together, and they were ticked off because, the British soldiers were damaging them. And we said, you're passing laws in England, in the British Parliament, that we don't agree with. We don't have our own reps there arguing. And the British came back and said, well, you see, you're virtually represented. We're virtually represented today.
In spirit.
At best. When you tell LA County, we're giving you 5 supervisors for 10 million people. I got one friend of mine who says the representation in LA County is so horrid, the citizens deserve armed revolt. 5 supervisors. The idea that you share one supervisor with 2 million people? Unfathomable.
So do you plan to run for office or a crusade? Or both?
I couldn't get into office saying what I'm saying. You think I could?
Yeah.
Well, maybe. Well, listen.
Voting by the body was the majority thought like the guys in this room, yes.
Let me tell you something.
Wouldn't be effective.
When you get good representation, you don't have to be in the legislature. You can do what you could just say. You're in the Brian. You're my rep. Here's the petition I want. You don't do it, somebody else will knock you out. You don't need it.
You hire government so you don't have to.
You got it. Yeah.
Because you have, you've got your own lives to live. If you have to do it, then you don't need all those guys up at the Capitol.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Yeah. All of a sudden you get control of it, and like you say, it becomes an agency thing. All of a sudden, we don't have, when your district has, in some of the better states with better representation, they got 1 rep for 10,000 people. They're already ignoring you. When I get petitions, when I get emails from reps in New Hampshire, and I'm sitting in federal court arguing that I can't even hear back from my own reps, and they paid a lawyer a lot of money to argue that he doesn't have to respond to me. Yeah, that's where we're at right now. And the bigger question is, why are we paying taxes? There you go.
One more question. Aside from this video, is there any other of your structuralism ideas out there, say on YouTube or somewhere?
No.
No?
I think I'm just about the only person. I just sort of coined the term a couple months ago. It is structuralism. You have to have the basic structure. If you and I have a contract, if the terms aren't met, either one or two of us are actionable. We go to court, we sue over it, or we rip up the contract. Constitution is a standing contract. But the reality is, if the various clauses aren't being enforced, we're stuck. And that's where we're at. Plenty of times in any given day that due process isn't followed. You guys had Sheriff Mack here. He's the first law enforcement officer that actually said that no, a cop may not just arrest a person and throw him in jail. He said the first thing a police officer may do, should do, has to do is take you to a judge and hold a probable cause hearing. First time I've ever heard that. That's where we're getting, is where the executive branch doesn't even know what their duties are. And we're at the point where we don't even know what we're supposed to demand. We certainly can't expect it. It's almost like when I send a petition to a legislature, I expect it to get ignored. Of course. Or if you talk to them on the phone, well, do I follow up? Well, thank you, sir. That's what they say. They'll say, well, thank you. Well, no, I'd like to know if you're going to do anything. Thank you, sir. That's what we get. No one else is really talking about structuralism. More people need to. All of you can. I'll make sure. I'll get you all the charts. You want these authorities? Nah, you can't have them. I won't let you know the authorities. I'll give you all of them. And if you guys can take them and give them to many more people, all the better. That's the most important thing. This is the most important thing. This is.
Can these at least be found on a website somewhere?
The website is californiacommonwealth.com.
Do their job.
Can the citizens of California create an initiative or proposition to update and amend the Constitution to a more favorable ratio?
Absolutely. In fact, I've got a petition that's sitting in the there's a wonderful law in California that allows a citizen to draft a petition for amending a law. If you get 25 signatures, the Ledge Council actually has to draft it for you, and I've done that. They've been sitting on it for quite a few months now. And I'm waiting for them. I've been prodding them lately.
What's the, have they given you any feedback on what the, is it an assembly bill, will it have a number or something?
No, it won't, no. It is an initiative that'll come back to me and that we'd have to collect signatures on. That's one process we can go. I want just a petition to be able to do that. Generally it takes, in this state, 800,000 just to get enough signatures. And then to fight a decent fight, $3 to $4 million for a campaign. One gentleman who writes for the LA Times told me that if they felt that this was viable, the unions would raise as much as $28 to $38 million just to fight this. The unions are really the people who would be most against it, the executive branch. When I brought my lawsuit, the law firm that represented the unions fought it. This is the most important thing. In a representative republic, the legislature, your access to your reps, is paramount. More important than anything else. Like John Adams said, it is the representative legislature that is the most important to be formed. That's what's broken today. In the U.S. House, it's been 100 years since the number of U.S. House members has been increased. The population went from 100 million to 300 million. District size tripled. We're 3 times less likely to be able to have access. They've taken on more assistance to do more things than we can ever possibly imagine. We don't direct our reps don't talk to us. Very few people get unelected. Very few people are tossed out. Favorability of the U.S. House was at 10%. 90% get reelected. Same thing in California. Favorability was at 15%. Everybody got reelected. And that's where we're at. The most important thing in a representative republic is the legislature. That's what needs to change. And that's it. Yay! Well, thank you.
Thank you.
More questions, ask them. If you got them, take them.